So today we're going to be factoring when a is not equal to 1. So in section 7.5, we saw factoring when a is equal to 1. Now we're going to kick it up a little bit, and our a term will not be equal to 1, which makes it a little bit more challenging than what we saw. We're going to go through a couple different methods in which you could use to do these types of problems. So in the previous lesson, you factored trinomials of the form x squared plus bx plus c. Now we're going to factor trinomials when our a term is not equal to 1. So this value right in here is not going to be equal to 1 on these problems that we're dealing with today. So first thing you want to do is you always want to start with the greatest common factor. We look and we say to ourselves, okay, is there a number that I can take out of each of my three terms here? So I've got 5x squared, 15x, and 10. And I say, okay, wait a second, I can take a 5 out of all of these. They all can be divided by 5. So the first thing you always want to do is you want to start by looking at the greatest common factor. You want to factor that out, similar to what we saw 2 lessons ago. So if I take out 5 out of 5x squared, I'm just going to be left with x squared. Take a 5 out of 15x, and you're going to be left with 5x. Oop, not 5x, 3x, sorry. And take a 5 out of 10, you're going to be left with 2. And now if we just look at this part in here, we can see now it looks exactly like what we saw in the last lesson, where we have x squared plus 3x plus 2. So your first step should always be, can I take anything out? Can I factor something out of there? And in this case, you can. Now you're just going to factor what I've highlighted here. So now it's our basic factoring, just like when a is equal to 1, where it has to multiply to 2, and it has to add to 3. So that's pretty basic. The only things that are factors of 2 that multiply to 2 and add to 3 are 2 and 1. So our final factored form is going to look like this. Don't forget about the 5 on the outside that you took out. And then x plus 2 times x plus 1. Because 2 times 1 is 2, and 2 plus 1 is 3. It adds to my b term, and there is my factored form. So the first thing you're always going to look at is, can you take that greatest common factor out? If you can take a greatest common factor out, factor that out, and then factor whatever's less. Now, when you multiply 3x plus 2 times 2x plus 5, the coefficient of the x squared term is the product of the coefficient of the x terms. So if we see here, we have 3x and 2x. Notice that ends up being 6x squared, which is that coefficient that's in front of that x squared term. Also, the constants in the trinomial is the product of the constants of the binomials. So if I move myself out of here, notice 2 and 5 gets me the 10 that's right here. So today we're going to factor quadratic trinomials using a couple different methods. The first method is the guess and check method. When we're using a guess and check method, what you want to do is you want to look at factors of your a term. So factors of your a term, which in this case is 3, and factors of your c term, which in this case is 2. So if we look at factors of your a term, which is 3, the only factors of your a term are 3 and 1. And the only factors of your c term are 2 and 1. Now, notice that your b term is a negative here, okay? So if our b term is negative, as it is here, I have to say to myself, one of those is going to be positive and one of those is going to be negative. And I guess and check using what's called the smile technique. So maybe I try 3x minus 2. Sorry, they're both going to be negative. And x minus 1. So look at what your middle terms add up to be here. Negative 2 times x is negative 2x. And 3x times negative 1 is negative 3x. Now, I know it has to add up to a negative 7x. This adds up to a negative 5x. So that is not the correct factored form there. So when using the guess and check technique, you have to go through and you have to literally guess and check until you get the correct answer. So I say to myself, okay, let me switch those around. Didn't mean to erase everything. That's okay. 3 and 2. So we have 3, 1, 2, 1. So now I'm going to try with a negative 2 here and a negative 1 here. Now check it out. Negative 1 times x is negative 1x. 3x times negative 2 is negative 6x. What does that end up being? It ends up being negative 7x, which is the correct middle term there. So this is my correct factored form. How did I know to do 3 and 1 in terms of in front of my x's? Because those are the only factors of a. How did I know to do -2 and -1? Those are the only factors of 2. Okay, so guessing and checking is kind of a long way, and it sometimes could be a little bit tedious. We'll try one more thing here. The problem here with this one here is if we look at factors of a, which is 4, I can have 4 and 1, or I can also have 2 and 2. So I don't know which one it's going to be. And then I look at factors of 3, which could be only just 3 and 1. So I have to just try things. So maybe I'll try it with 2x and 2x to start. Put a 3 in here, put a 1 in here. Your middle terms would be, I need it to be 6 or 13x. So 6x and then 2x on the outsides. Well, that's not going to work because that only adds up to 8x. So that's out. So what if I flip them? No, it's going to be the same thing. So I know it's not 2x and 2x. So I'm going to try with 4 and 1. So maybe I'll try 4x plus 3 and then 1x plus 1. Well, let's see what we get there. We get a 3x here and a 4x here. Nope, that adds to 7x. So you see the problem with the guess and check technique? It could take a while to get your right answer. What if we switch the 3 and the 1? That makes my inside 1x and my outside 12x. Add those together and I get 13x, which is what I need my middle term to be. So I know that's my right answer. Okay, so it's all about just plugging in and seeing which one ends up getting you the correct answer there. Now, the second way that you can go about doing this is what's called regrouping. Okay, regrouping is another technique that you can use in factoring when a is not equal to 1. Your first step in using the regrouping technique is to multiply your a and your c terms. So we would multiply here our a and our c terms, which would get us 6. So 3 times 2 is 6. Then, when regrouping, we want to find factors of a times c that add to b. So we have to look at, okay, I multiply a times c and I get 6. Now I have to find factors of 6 that are going to add to -7. Hopefully you're thinking -6, -1. Then you're going to split your b term and rewrite. So what do I mean by that? I mean I'm going to take this b term and I'm going to rewrite it. Instead of -7x, I'm going to rewrite it as -6x minus 1x. What my two factors are right here. So I'm going to have 3x squared minus 6x minus 1x, and then keep that c term the same, plus 2. And now you're doing what's called factoring by grouping. So you're going to group your first two terms. You're going to group your second two terms. And you're going to look for the greatest common factor. So we're going to group your terms next. And you should write down these steps. Step 5, you're going to factor out the greatest common factor. So I'm looking at 3x squared minus 6x, and I say I can take a 3x out of there. So we're going to 3x times 1x minus 2. And then you do the same thing here on the second one, but your two parentheses have to match. So notice how they're not matching here, but if I take a minus 1 out, I'm going to get 1x minus 2. These must match right here. So this and this have to match. And they do now. If they don't match, then you haven't factored correctly. Now, you're almost done. One of your factored forms is going to come from here. What you've factored out of each of those. So that's going to be, in this case, 3x minus 1. Your second factored form is going to become from your repeated one. We only write it once. 1x minus 2. And there's your final answer. Okay? So just to recap, because this is a little bit confusing, this method, start by multiplying a times c. So I started 3 times 2, I got 6. Need to find factors of a times c that are going to multiply to 6, in this case, and add up to my middle term, -7. Then I'm going to split the middle term with those two factors. Group the terms in terms of the first two and the second two. Factor out the greatest common factor. And then the last step, write your parentheses. Factoring by grouping is important for you to be able to do, okay? But it is a bit of a confusing method, at least in the beginning. The final technique that we're going to show you is using the same exact method that same exact problem, but using what's called the slide technique. The slide technique starts the same way as factoring by grouping, by multiplying your a times your c. So we're going to do the same thing, multiply a times c, and then same thing, you're going to find factors of a times c that add to b. So 3 times 2 is 6. Obviously, we already know it's going to be -6 and -1 because those add up to -7. Now, the slide technique says, okay, then you're going to write those in your parentheses like you would normally do in regular factoring. So I'm going to write it as x minus 6 and x minus 1, like I normally would. Now, that's not your answer, though, because the slide technique says you need to divide from this point by your a term. Okay, so my a term here is 3. So I need to divide both of these values here by 3. You want to reduce your fractions if possible. Now, the reason when we were factoring a equal to 1, we didn't have to divide by your a term is because it was 1, so you didn't have to do that. So you're reducing your fractions if possible. So obviously on this fraction here, we have 6 over 3, which just reduces to 2. So this one is going to this first set of parentheses here is just going to become x minus 2. All I've done is reduce that fraction. The second one, there's not anything to reduce. So you're still left with x minus 3. The reason we call it the slide method is now you slide the denominators that are left in front of x. So I'm going to take that 3 and I'm going to slide it right in there in front of the x. So nothing to move on the first term, x minus 2. Slide the second one, you're going to get 3x minus 1. So all I've done is I've slid that denominator in front of my x to get x minus 2 times 3x minus 1. And notice that's the same answer that we got here using the regrouping technique. 3x minus 1 times x minus 2. It doesn't matter the order that you write these. And notice it's the same answer that we got using the guess and check technique. So it doesn't matter which method you use, find the one that you're most comfortable with. I tend to like the slide technique. I think it's the easiest to follow. I think it follows most similarly to regular factoring. You just have to remember a couple things. First thing, when your a is not equal to 1, multiply a times c. Then you have to remember to divide by that a term when you get down to the last few steps. Let's look at another one where using the slide technique where a is not equal to 1. So nothing I can factor out to the beginning. So I'm going to start by multiplying 4 times 3, which is going to get me 12. So I have to come up with things that are multiplying to 12 and adding to 13. Hopefully you're saying 12 and 1. Now I write it just like I would normal factoring, x plus 12 times x plus 1. But I have an a term here of 4, so I have to divide by that a term. 12 over 4 becomes x plus 3, because 12 divided by 4. Here, can't reduce it, so I slide that 4 in front, and I get 4x plus 1. And again, we did this using another technique earlier, and we got the same exact answer. Let's look when c is negative. Does it matter? Doesn't matter. Again, I'm going to use the slide technique. 2 times -7 is -14. Has to multiply to -14 and add to -5. Hopefully you're saying -7 and 2. Write it like it would a normal factoring. X minus 7 times x minus 2. You're not done. A is equal to 2 here. Need to divide by 2. -7 over 2, there's nothing to simplify, so the 2 is going to slide in front, and you're going to get 2x minus 7. 2 over 2 can be simplified to just 1, so you're going to get x minus 1. We've got lots of try these to do in class. We'll do them there. Make sure that you copy down all the notes. Pause it a couple times. Rewatch it because this is really, 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 really important stuff. See ya.